You're a fool, Tara, always throwing away what little you have. Her old boss barked as she left the group home, a quiet barista who spent her days brewing coffee and dodging shadows of debt and lost friends, never knowing one act would pull her under. 30 minutes after a slow afternoon shift, she covered the cost of baby formula for a struggling teenage mom, Sophie, only to be sacked for breaking cafe rules. Days later, a private jet landed near her crumbling flat. Life was about to turn in the most suspenseful way. Hello everyone. Welcome to Narrative Whispers. Today I'm going to tell you another heartwarming story, so let's dive into it. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of Tara's one-bedroom apartment, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. At 26, she had grown accustomed to the quiet solitude that greeted her each day, a stark contrast to the chaotic years she'd spent bouncing between group homes as a teenager. She rolled over in bed, silencing her alarm with a practiced tap, and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to stare at the ceiling, a small ritual of stillness before the rush of another day began. The water stains above her bed had begun to resemble a map of some distant continent, and she often found herself tracing imaginary journeys across their irregular borders while gathering the strength to face another day. Tara's morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency. 7 minutes for a lukewarm shower, 4 minutes to brush her teeth and pull her unruly auburn hair into a serviceable ponytail, and precisely 10 minutes to dress in her cafe uniform. The black polo shirt and khaki pants were far from the artistic expression she craved, but they represented stability, something she had learned never to take for granted. As she slipped her feet into her comfortable but worn service shoes, she caught a glimpse of her half-finished canvas leaning against the wall, a burst of color and emotion that she'd been working on for months between shifts, the only true testament to her dreams beyond the confines of her current life. Another day, another dollar, she whispered to herself, the phrase a mantra inherited from Mrs. Kelly, the last and kindest of her foster mothers. The older woman had passed away 3 years ago, leaving Tara with little more than memories and a collection of paintbrushes that now sat in a chipped ceramic mug on her windowsill. Tara allowed herself a moment of melancholy before shaking it off and grabbing her keys from the hook by the door. She couldn't afford to be late again. Jason, the cafe manager, had already given her 2 warnings this month, and she knew all too well how quickly security could dissolve into uncertainty. The bus ride to Perks and Brews took exactly 22 minutes, a journey Tara had made 6 days a week for the past 18 months. She spent the time sketching in her pocket-sized notebook, capturing fleeting expressions of fellow passengers or the soft curves of a sleeping child's face. Today, she found herself drawing the hands of an elderly man seated across from her, gnarled and spotted with age, yet still possessing a certain grace as they clutched a worn leather-bound book. Art had always been her escape, her way of processing a world that had rarely shown her kindness, and these stolen moments of creativity were often what kept her going through long shifts of customer service smiles. The cafe was already bustling when Tara arrived, the morning rush in full swing as harried professionals lined up for their caffeine fix before heading to their office jobs. She slipped behind the counter with a nod to May, her coworker who had been covering for her, and immediately fell into the rhythm of steam wands and espresso shots. There was comfort in the predictability of it all, the precise measurements, the familiar faces, the scripted interactions that required little emotional investment. For someone whose early life had been defined by uncertainty, the steady routine of the cafe provided a foundation that felt almost like belonging. "Double shot, extra hot, no foam," barked a man in an expensive suit without looking up from his phone, his wedding ring clinking against the counter as he impatiently tapped his fingers. Tara nodded, suppressing the urge to point out that he neglected to say please, and instead focused on preparing his drink with the same care she applied to all her orders. Small acts of craftsmanship were her silent rebellion against rudeness. A perfectly poured latte, an expertly crafted cappuccino, these were her ways of maintaining dignity in a job that often left her feeling invisible. The morning rush gradually subsided, giving way to the quieter lull of late morning. Tara wiped down the espresso machine, her muscles relaxing slightly as the pressure of rapid-fire orders dissipated. Jason emerged from the back office, clipboard in hand, his perpetual frown deepening as he made notes about inventory and sales. "We're low on caramel syrup again," he said, not bothering to look up. "And corporate's been on my case about costs. No more free refills for the regulars, got it?" We're not a charity. Tara nodded, though the policy felt unnecessarily harsh for the handful of elderly customers who nursed their single coffee for hours, seeking companionship more than caffeine. By early afternoon, the cafe had settled into its familiar rhythm of college students with laptops and remote workers nursing their third beverage of the day. Tara moved efficiently between tasks, restocking supplies and clearing tables during quiet moments. Her mind wandered to the upcoming bill payments. Rent was due in a week, and the final notice for her old medical debt had arrived yesterday, its red lettering a stark reminder of the financial tightrope she walked. Art school remained a distant dream, the stack of brochures she'd collected over the years now yellowing in her desk drawer. Tuition figures that might as well have been written in another language for all the possibility they held. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Tara from her thoughts. A girl, no, a young woman, barely out of her teens, stumbled in, her face flushed with exertion and stress. In her arms, she clutched a fussing infant wrapped in a thin blanket, the baby's cries growing more insistent by the second. The young mother looked around frantically, her eyes wide with a desperation Tara recognized all too well. "Is there a bathroom where I can change him?" she asked, her voice strained with exhaustion. Tara pointed toward the back hall, offering a sympathetic smile. "Take your time," she said gently. "Can I get you anything while you're here?" When the young woman returned 10 minutes later, the baby had quieted somewhat but still squirmed uncomfortably in her arms. "He's hungry," she explained, sinking into a chair near the counter. "I just need to mix his formula." She dug through an oversized bag, pulling out a bottle and a small container of powder with trembling hands. Tara watched discreetly as she struggled to measure the powder while keeping the baby steady, a few precious granules spilling onto the table. Something in the girl's determined yet overwhelmed demeanor stirred a memory in Tara of herself at 17, trying to navigate a world that expected adult competence without providing any of the necessary support or guidance. "Would you like some hot water for that?" Tara offered, already reaching for a clean pitcher. The young woman looked up, relief washing over her tired features. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Sophie, by the way, and this little monster is Liam." She bounced the fussing infant gently, pressing a kiss to his forehead despite her obvious exhaustion. Tara introduced herself as she carefully filled the pitcher with water at the precise temperature recommended for formula preparation, knowledge she'd picked up from another regular customer with twins. "He's beautiful," Tara said sincerely, taking in the baby's round cheeks and wispy dark hair. "How old?" 4 months next week," Sophie replied, a hint of pride breaking through her fatigue. "Though sometimes it feels like we've been doing this dance forever." She laughed softly, but Tara caught the edge of something deeper. Loneliness, perhaps, or the weight of responsibilities far beyond her years. Sophie mixed the formula with practiced movements, tested the temperature on her wrist, and finally offered the bottle to Liam, who latched on eagerly. The cafe had emptied out, leaving just the two of them in the quiet space. "Do you want something to drink?" Tara asked. "On the house," she added impulsively, glancing toward the back to make sure Jason wasn't within earshot. Sophie hesitated, chewing her lower lip. "I shouldn't," she said finally. "I'm actually here to pick up a few things from the market next door, and I'm trying to stretch my budget until—" She trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. Tara understood all too well the calculations that went into every purchase when money was tight, the constant arithmetic of survival. "At least let me get you a muffin," she insisted. "We have to throw out the day-olds anyway." This wasn't strictly true. Jason had a strict inventory policy, but Tara decided some rules were meant to be broken. As Sophie gratefully accepted the blueberry muffin, Tara noticed the worn edges of her coat and the way her eyes darted to the price board, quickly looking away as if the numbers might bite. They chatted while Liam finished his bottle, Sophie gradually relaxing enough to share snippets of her story. How she'd left home after a fight with her father, how Liam's father had vanished upon learning of the pregnancy, how she was taking online classes between caring for the baby and working part-time at a local dry cleaner. Tara found herself sharing bits of her own past in return, creating a momentary bridge of understanding between two women who had known what it meant to face the world alone. When Sophie finally gathered her things to leave, Tara noticed her lingering by the small display of grocery items near the register, a convenient selection of overpriced necessities for customers in a hurry. Sophie's gaze was fixed on the small containers of baby formula, her expression a complex mixture of longing and resignation. "I thought I had enough to last the week," she murmured, more to herself than to Tara. "But he's going through it so quickly now." She adjusted Liam in her arms, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she turned to leave. "Thanks for the muffin and the company. It was nice to talk to someone over the age of 4 months for a change." Tara made a split-second decision, the kind that comes from the heart rather than the head. "Wait," she called softly, reaching for one of the formula containers. "Take this, please." She pressed it into Sophie's free hand before the younger woman could protest. Sophie's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "I can't," she began. But Tara shook her head firmly. "Consider it a gift, from someone who's been there." It wasn't entirely true. Tara had never had a child to care for. But she knew the weight of need, the heavy silence of empty cupboards, the pride that made accepting help both necessary and painful. Sophie's eyes welled with tears, one escaping to track down her cheek before she could brush it away. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the formula against her chest alongside Liam. "I promise I'll pay it forward someday." Tara nodded, a lump forming in her own throat as she watched Sophie leave, the bell above the door chiming gently in her wake. The moment of connection left Tara feeling both lighter and heavier, glad to have helped but acutely aware of how precarious both their situations were, how easily kindness could be constrained by circumstance. What Tara didn't notice was Jason standing in the doorway to the back room, his expression hardening as he watched the exchange. She continued her closing duties, humming softly to herself, unaware that her small act of compassion had been witnessed. It wasn't until she was wiping down the last table that he approached, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "My office, now." His tone left no room for discussion, and Tara felt her stomach drop, instantly aware of what had transpired. She followed him silently, already calculating how many shifts she would need to work to cover the cost of the formula herself. Jason didn't offer her a seat, remaining standing behind his cluttered desk as he launched into his lecture. "Corporate policy is clear, Tara. No freebies, no exceptions. That formula costs us $15 wholesale." His voice was cold, methodical, as if he were discussing a particularly troublesome inventory discrepancy rather than a hungry baby. "I've overlooked your extra napkins and occasional free refills, but this crosses a line. You effectively stole from this company today." Tara wanted to argue, to explain about Sophie and Liam, about the look in the young mother's eyes, but she knew it would make no difference. In Jason's world, rules were rules, and compassion was not a factor in the equation. "I'll pay for it," Tara offered quietly, reaching for her wallet. "Take it out of my paycheck if you need to." Jason shook his head, a flicker of something almost like regret crossing his features before his professional mask slipped back into place. "It's not about the money, Tara. It's about trust and policy adherence. I can't have employees who think they can make their own rules." The words that followed, terminated effective immediately, shouldn't have surprised her, but they still hit like a physical blow. 5 years of perfect customer service ratings, of never calling in sick, of covering shifts at a moment's notice, all undone by one moment of humanity. Tara walked home that evening, unable to justify the bus fare when her income had suddenly evaporated. The spring air held a hint of chill as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. She moved mechanically, her mind racing through options that dwindled with each passing block. Her savings would cover next month's rent, maybe 2 if she was extremely careful. The art school brochures seemed to mock her now, a dream that had been unlikely before and was impossible now. She thought of Sophie and Liam, wondering if they were warm tonight, if the formula would last until whatever payday Sophie was waiting for. Despite everything, Tara couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. 3 days passed in a blur of online job applications and increasingly desperate calculations. Tara had just returned from dropping off her resume at every cafe within walking distance when she noticed something unusual on her street. A sleek black car with tinted windows idling near her apartment building. She slowed her pace, a lifetime of caution making her wary of anything out of the ordinary in her neighborhood. As she approached, the back door opened, and a man in a crisp suit emerged, his salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, his posture radiating authority and confidence. "Tara Bennett?" he called, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. Tara froze, her instincts screaming caution even as curiosity tugged at her. "Who's asking?" she replied, keeping her distance. The man smiled, the expression softening his otherwise severe features. "My name is Richard Grayson. I believe you met my daughter, Sophie, and my grandson, Liam, at your cafe a few days ago." His words were like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together in Tara's mind. Sophie, the struggling young mother with worn shoes and careful spending habits, was the daughter of a man who traveled in a car worth more than Tara would make in several years. Before she could process this information, another door opened, and Sophie herself stepped out, Liam bundled securely in her arms. "It's really him," Sophie confirmed, reading the confusion and wariness on Tara's face. "My father. We've been estranged for a while." She moved closer, her expression open and sincere. "I told him what you did for us, how you lost your job because of me." Guilt shadowed her features, but there was something else there too, a determined sort of hope that Tara couldn't quite understand. Grayson gestured toward the car. "Would you join us for a conversation, Ms. Bennett? I believe we have much to discuss, and I'd prefer not to do so on the street." Curiosity overcame caution, and Tara found herself seated in the plush leather interior of the vehicle, facing Sophie and her father while Liam slept peacefully in a state-of-the-art car seat. The contrast between this luxury and the tired young mother from the cafe was jarring. Grayson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his voice carrying the weight of regret. "Sophie and I had a falling out when she was 18. I was rigid in my expectations, and when she chose a different path, I responded poorly. We didn't speak for nearly 2 years. Sophie picked up the thread, her voice soft but steady. "I met Leo during my first year of college. He was charming, artistic, everything my father wasn't. We fell in love, or what I thought was love." She glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "When I got pregnant, Leo vanished, literally overnight. I was too proud to go home, too ashamed to admit that Dad had been right about him all along. So I dropped out, found a tiny apartment, and tried to make it work on my own." Her eyes met Tara's. "I was doing okay until Liam got sick last month. The medical bills wiped out my cushion, and then the formula costs increased, and suddenly I was choosing between electricity and food." Grayson's expression softened as he looked at his daughter and grandson. "Sophie finally called me 3 days ago. She told me everything, including how a stranger showed her more kindness than her own father had." He turned his gaze to Tara, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "You gave my daughter something I had failed to provide, unconditional support without judgment. You risked your livelihood for her welfare. That's not something I can overlook or fail to acknowledge." Tara shifted uncomfortably under his intense gaze. "Anyone would have done the same," she murmured, though she knew from experience that wasn't true. Many would have looked away, avoided involvement, protected their own interests first. Grayson shook his head. "We both know that's not the case, Ms. Bennett. Your actions speak to your character, and character is something I value highly." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, which he placed on the seat beside Tara. "This is to compensate you for the job you lost because of our family's situation. It's not charity. It's recognition of the price you paid for your principles." The envelope remained untouched as Tara struggled to find words. "I don't need compensation for doing the right thing," she finally said, her pride battling with her precarious financial reality. Sophie leaned forward, Liam stirring slightly in her arms. "Please, Tara, let us help you the way you helped us. Dad isn't just here about the money." She looked at her father expectantly, and Mr. Grayson nodded, his expression becoming more businesslike. "Sophie mentioned you're an artist, that you dream of furthering your education but haven't had the opportunity. I'd like to offer you that opportunity, along with a position at Grayson Technologies. We have an extensive art department that develops visual concepts for our products and marketing materials." Tara's heart raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. "I don't have a degree," she pointed out, her practical side asserting itself despite the surreal nature of the conversation. "And I don't have formal training beyond high school art classes." Mr. Grayson waved away her concerns. "Raw talent and character are far more valuable than credentials. Sophie showed me your sketchbook, the one you left behind at the cafe. Your work has soul, Ms. Bennett. Technical skills can be taught, but vision and integrity cannot." The revelation that Sophie had retrieved her forgotten sketchbook, the one Tara had been frantically searching for since losing her job, was yet another surprise in a day full of them. "You have my sketchbook?" she asked, emotion making her voice catch. Sophie nodded, reaching into her bag to pull out the worn notebook. "I went back to the cafe to thank you properly, But they said you'd been fired. The manager had cleaned out your locker. She handed the book to Tara, who clutched it gratefully. I hope you don't mind that I looked through it. Your drawings, they're beautiful. You captured Liam perfectly, even in those few minutes. Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, his expression softening as he watched the exchange. My offer stands, Ms. Bennett. Art school if you wish it. A position with our company that would allow you to develop your skills while earning a living wage. And an apartment in our corporate housing, if your current lease allows for early termination. He held up a hand as Tara opened her mouth to respond. Before you answer, I want to be clear. This is not charity. It's an investment in someone who has demonstrated exceptional character and talent. Sophie and Liam will be moving back to my home while she completes her degree. I would consider it a personal favor if you would consider joining our family's journey forward. Tara looked from Mr. Grayson to Sophie, then down at the sleeping face of baby Liam. She thought of her tiny apartment with its ceiling stains and drafty windows, of the dead-end jobs and deferred dreams, of the years spent surviving rather than living. She thought of Mrs. Kelly, who had always told her that kindness would find its way back to her someday. With trembling fingers, she opened her sketchbook to find her most recent drawings, the ones of Sophie and Liam in the cafe, captured in quick, loving strokes that somehow conveyed both their vulnerability and their strength. I would be honored, Tara said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Not because of the money or the opportunity, though I'm grateful for both, but because... She looked directly at Sophie, who was watching her with shining eyes. Because I think we could all use a little more family in our lives. Sophie's smile broke like sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. Grayson nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression as he extended his hand to Tara. As she took it, feeling the firm, warm grip of this unexpected ally, Tara felt something shift inside her. The first tentative unfurling of hope, the quiet certainty that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As the sleek car pulled away from her apartment building, Tara gazed out at the neighborhood that had been her world for so long. She wasn't naive enough to believe that all her problems would magically vanish, or that the road ahead would be without challenges. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of constant struggle begin to lift, replaced by the lighter burden of possibility. Her single act of kindness, a small container of formula offered without expectation of return, had somehow opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Tara closed her eyes, sending a silent thank you to the universe for this unexpected turn, and allowed herself to imagine the canvas of her future, blank and waiting for the first bold stroke of color. Thank you for listening to this story. If you like it, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story of Narrative Whispers.